Trinity. Well, that gospel was a doozy. And the next time it comes up in the lectionary, I promise I'll preach on it. But this week, I could not get the story of Esther out of my head. The beautiful young woman who became queen and used her beauty and brains to save her people. The story reads almost like a fairy tale, but like most fairy tales, it is far more complicated than it seems. Esther was, like the other young women of the kingdom, drafted to appear in a lineup of young women from which the king was going to choose his new wife. Now, the text is not at all interested in whether Esther wanted to be the king's wife, and it is really not interested in the woman who was the king's first wife, Vashti. In fact, we never hear Vashti's story in church. The text itself, and later the church, has treated her like it treats many other women, as what Dr. Anna Carter Florence calls a dangerous memory. And the church has treated her story only as useful as an introduction to Esther's story, the real story. So who was she? Vashti's story begins when King Ahasuerus, who ruled a wide swath of land from Ethiopia to India, throws the biggest party the ancient world had ever seen, inviting all the ruling class from all 127 of his provinces to the fanciest blowout ever. And the kicker is that this party was not to celebrate a military victory, a birthday, or a wedding. It was just to celebrate him, the king. It was a festival of me, a narcissist's dream, where the only point was to impress the whole world with just how fabulous and wealthy he was. And a party to which women were not invited. So it was fueled by testosterone with a lot of alcohol thrown in. And on the 187th day of the party, the king got to talking about his wife, Vashti, about how much more beautiful, obedient, and fabulous she was than any of the other men's wives. And to prove his point and to demonstrate his absolute power over her, he sent for Vashti, commanding that she come to the party wearing only her crown so that everyone can see her beauty. Yeah, you heard that right. He commands his wife to parade naked through a room full of drunk men. And everyone knows that what the king commands, the king gets. And you also know that whatever happens, this is not going to end well for Vashti. Yet here is where things go slightly off script. Vashti, you see, becomes the first woman in Scripture to just say no. No, I will not come out and degrade myself so that you can save face in front of your friends. No, I will not do whatever you tell me to do. And I most definitely will not do it when you have been drunk for 187 days. Now, that unexpected response did not go over well. The king was embarrassed, humiliated in front of all the important men of the kingdom. And worse, women all over the kingdom from Ethiopia to Persia heard that the queen said no. And the men in the room, while at first just quietly laughing at the king's expense, suddenly had the awful thought that perhaps their women might not listen to them either. That this one woman might set off a tidal wave of rebellion throughout the empire, with women everywhere realizing the power of no. And this threat to domination, this upending of order, just could not be. They had to stop it. So the men put their heads together and came up with a plan. Banish Vashti and erase her memory from the land. Now, on one level, the men are successful. Vashti disappears. There is a beauty pageant for young virgins to come and compete for the queen's title, and eventually one of them wins. Esther is crowned queen, and we can get on with the real story of the book. And the church has long concurred with the king and his sages. We have erased the memory of Vashti. On another level, however, Vashti and her story cannot be erased. There are echoes of her great no reverberating through the Bible. Vashti may be, literally speaking or literally speaking, nothing but a backdrop for Esther for all that we hear about her. But in the story, she lives on in the minds of her people, of the king, and most importantly, of Queen Esther herself. Esther, who was only crowned because she kept hidden the dangerous memory of her Jewish heritage, chooses to step forward and risk her life when all the Jews in the land are threatened with death. It dawns on her that perhaps God may have sent her to the kingdom for such a time as this. She speaks up. She saves her people, which was a courageous and noble thing to do, and I can't help but wonder if one of the things that influenced her was the courage of Queen Vashti. The realization that she was called on to have the same courage as the woman who said no to the king. In an age when women had no purpose at all other than being decorative and fertile, Vashti had blazed a trail. No, she said, I am more than one of your possessions. I am more than another beautiful decoration in your home. I am a human being with dignity and respect. And here I draw the line. I say no. Esther finishes what Vashti started. And together, their story is a sacred memory of how women or any oppressed people can overturn a world by just saying no. It is the story of how we are so connected that just as one injustice can lead to another, one resistance can give rise to another. And you would think that the institution that was built to follow Jesus, the ultimate rule breaker for justice and love, would love this story. But we never even hear it. Isn't it odd, then, that in the eyes of the church, this sacred memory has become a dangerous memory? What is so dangerous about it? Throughout the ages, perhaps this story, with its clear dynamic of a woman defying a man, was just too disruptive to the way things are supposed to be. I mean, you can't have women going around thinking and acting for themselves, right? And while I think that has an awful lot to do with Vashti's story, with why it hasn't been told in church, it is actually much more than a story about male-female dynamics, much more than a story for women looking for inspiration to rebel. It is the story of a human being declaring that she is a human being, fully deserving of dignity. It is a story for everyone and anyone who has had her integrity called into question. It is a story for anyone who has been pressured by those who have power over them to do something they know is wrong, something that would cost them their self-respect. It is a story for anyone who has been in, witnessed an unjust situation and said, no, I cannot go along with this, I cannot do this. What would it be to hold this story up and to tell it to our children? Would it give them a role model for just saying no to adults who try to harm them? Would it give our daughters a little more strength to just say no to a boyfriend who keeps pressuring them to have sex when they don't want to? Would it give you and me a place to begin talking about the hundreds of awkward, troubling moments in our lives when we feel we are being asked to do something that puts our integrity at risk? The boss tells us to hide money in a fake expense account. Someone tells a racist joke or makes a racist post on social media and is looking for us to laugh or agree. Things can and do happen every day that challenge our integrity. What do we do? Do we say no? And what about issues of public life? Do we say no to the scapegoating of an entire population, as Esther said no to the scapegoating of the targeting of her people? Do we reject the racism and xenophobia that turns God's beloveds into other? Oddly, the Bible does not have many role models for just saying no. Jesus did put his foot down on several occasions, but we tend to think of our Christian faith in terms of saying yes to God, to Christ, to a way of life. Maybe what we need to hear is that an equally important part of our life as Christians is finding the courage to say no when we need to, even if that is a difficult or costly thing to say. The story of Vashti, the king, and Esther does not have a clean and neat resolution. Vashti does not save the day with her no. By any of the world's measures, she is a loser. The king and his cronies take away her crown, her position, her good name. When Vashti says no, she gets herself exiled. And the backlash is a pretty harsh law about wives being subservient to their husbands. But in the eyes of God, I think something really different is going on. Vashti's courage encourages the next woman, and the next, and the next. Vashti's great no becomes Esther's great no, so that the Jews are not systematically murdered. Vashti's example encourages people to speak up for themselves. True, that does not immediately change the world. Sometimes it seems we have to take a lot of steps backwards before we begin to inch forward. But her no set something in motion which people remembered, which Esther remembered, which the writers of the Bible remembered, which even the king remembered. And sometimes we have to trust that that is enough. And I would guess that neither the king nor his men were in a rush to order their wives to parade around in just a crown ever again. I wonder how many kings of this world are waiting for a Vashti to just say no. Perhaps you have, or you will encounter one of them. Perhaps it is even possible that you have been sent to the kingdom for such a time as this. May it be so.